Se estrenó la segunda temporada de The Umbrella Academy y pude hablar con uno de sus directores de fotografía, con Wrobleski, que también estuvo en la primera. Hablamos de qué cambió entre una temporada y la otra, de cómo se trabaja con este elenco, principalmente qué significa trabajar con él en Page, y de cómo fue hacer, por ejemplo, todas esas referencias que aparecen en esta segunda temporada.
We now return to Mira a quien encontré with our latest interview. You're always reading Umbrella Academy scripts, and they're always fantastic to read, and it's just always a pleasure to read them. And then you know, on first read, you read the scripts as a viewer, and you're like, this is amazing. And then the second read, you start to think about how you're going to do it. And then it starts to get a little scary, because you're like, okay.
What the hell did we do now?
Well, the two seasons of Umbrella were quite different. I mean, there was a lot of the best parts of the first season, obviously, carried through to the second season, but the key difference was the way it was structured, where, you know, the cast members all landed in Dallas at different time frames, so they all had their own individual stories, and they built their own individual lives before they all got back together. So each character had its own individual arc, which was really fun to play with in terms of the storytelling, because everyone had a different world they were living in. You know, like the Vanya cornfield sequence, for example, in episode 3, when she's being chased by the Swedes through the cornfield. You know, that's not a TV sequence. That's the feature film sequence, you know, and it's like, how do we do this in a TV world? So, you know, it just requires a lot of planning and a lot of conversations. We had a great director on that episode, Steven Surgic, who really understood what he wanted to do and was such a great leader and such a great voice to get us through it. But, I mean, it was different this year in that it was so... We were on the road a lot. You know, we went to a lot of locations, a lot of new locations. So it was a lot more preparation this year to do it right. But it's critical to spend that time in prep, because on a show as ambitious as Umbrella, you really want, you know, you want to go in with a really solid plan A.
First off, I want to say we brought the end of the world back here with us.
Oh my God, again? My cult is going to be so pissed. I told him we had until 2019.
One of the other differences this year was that it was a very emotional season. I mean, season 1 had the usual Umbrella mix of kind of the wide range of human emotions, but I found season 2 to be very emotional. You know, there was a lot of emotional stakes. You know, you had Vanya's relationship with Sissy and how that affected Carl. You had, you know, Luther kind of finding a father figure in Ruby and how that affected him. You know, like Hargreaves was never a father to him, but now Ruby becomes like surrogate father, and all the emotions he's dealing with there. And obviously Allison in the civil rights movement, and also she's married. You know, and Klaus, of course, you know, having to deal with Ben all the time, like, you know, that whole thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, there was a lot more emotional stakes this year. It changed slightly how I approached the photography on the show, because I think that, you know, there's always been the kind of umbrella aspects. You know, we call them an umbrella. That's kind of the word we use. And we say this is really umbrella. And it's important to make sure that we keep the show the Umbrella Academy, but there was also certain emotional elements where we could get too umbrella on it, because it just felt like it needed to have the emotional weight. And if we sometimes went too extreme with the lensing or too extreme with the camera movement or even the camera angles, it was kind of deflating the emotional aspects a little bit.
None of us are supposed to be here, right?
We know something changes the timeline. We have to make it right again.
Every time you have to like work with time travel, it's really hard to like keep continuity. How was this for you? Keeping track in terms of lighting, setting, everything.
Yeah, I mean, well, you just have to ask Five to learn how complicated time travel can be, right? It's very complicated, and that was one of the things that was critical in the storytelling, was that the audience was always kind of knew where they were. You know, it was a really important thing early on in the first episode for Steve Blackman, the showrunner, that everyone understood when everyone was landing in Dallas, because it could get really confusing if you didn't understand, you know, where they were landing, how much time had elapsed between their landings, all those sorts of things. It really, it was critical that the audience understand that, because that really drove the narrative in terms of how, you know, like, for example, Allison had been there longer than Five, you know, so they all had a different take on Dallas and a different experience there. So, and that the time travel aspect is really confusing.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best of times, and I think it all came together really well. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions to make sure that we're right. I think a well choreographed fight can be like a dance, and I really wanted to accentuate the shapes of the people, because the choreography. So we'd seen the choreography beforehand, and we knew that it was like a dance because essentially Hargreaves has taught Diego all these moves. So he already knows what Diego's going to do because he taught him all this stuff, right? So it was a matter of that sort of dance where he we weren't sure who was leading the dance because Hargreaves had taught Diego this stuff. Diego thought he had the upper hand, but Hargreaves already knew what he was going to do next. So there was all of this kind of dance element to it. And I wanted to make sure that we could really look after the kind of graphic quality of the choreography, where it was a lot of it was less about punches and more about blocks and sort of choreographed movement as opposed to just kind of two guys pounding away at each other. So by shooting it against the silhouettes, against the strong light coming through the slats, arguably it's completely unrealistic. Like, where's that light coming from? What is that? It doesn't matter. You know, what mattered is we have this graphic quality, and that it really accentuates the physicality of the fight in a way that makes like a dance and is less like a typical fight.
But that's like the graphic novel quality of the show. I think you have
exactly.
You can do that.
Neville Kidd, the other director of photography on the show, he always says, don't worry about reality. We have a talking ape.
Yeah.
I know on set she's always been a leader. She always comes at things from a very pure place and is always very tuned into the story and the characters and where it needs to go. So she's always been a leader in that aspect. I mean, she's number one on the call sheet. She's number 7 in the Umbrella Academy, but she's number 1 on the call sheet. So she is a leader, and she's just such a brilliant actress that she's always, whenever she's on set, she's always leading the charge in a way. She always kind of knows what it wants to be, knows what it needs to be, and wants to make it the best it can be. The cornfield sequence is a great example of that, where she, we all know she's a great actress emotionally. I had no idea she was such a great physical actress. Because when the first time we ran, we had the camera mounted to an electric motorcycle to run down the aisles of the cornfield. And the first time we did it, we couldn't believe how fast Ellen was running. Like, she almost outran the motorbike. It was unbelievable. No one expected that, because she's, like I say, we all know she's a fantastic actress on an emotional level. But to see her physical capabilities was really impressive. I prefer sort of homage as to copying, I would rather, let's be honest, everybody who's making films is standing on the shoulders of anybody who's ever made a film.
I can do this all day.
I can do this all day.
We be careful that we give the reference its due, but we don't want to, mimic it exactly, because then it kind of diminishes the original reference. It's like we want to take what someone else did and shape it into something that fits into our world, and where the audience might go, oh, this is like that scene, but it's still Umbrella Academy,